Stacey.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Good afternoon. Great pleasure to see you here. There are competing events taking place today, but it is good to have you all here. COP President will give a few introductory remarks, and we will then continue from there. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. President.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Alex. So welcome everyone to week 2 of COP26. Today, as you know, is Adaptation and Loss and Damage Day, and these topics, of course, are more important than ever before. And over the last year, we have seen extreme weather rage across the world, from floods in Central Europe and China, wildfires in North America and Australia, to what some have described as the world's first climate-induced drought in southern Madagascar. Nowhere is immune to climate change, and this is precisely why we must come together to forge global agreement here in Glasgow, responding to adaptation needs, which is vital. Today, ministers are starting their work on the negotiations. Together, we face the arduous task of building political consensus between almost 200 countries. Finding consensus is not going to be straightforward, but the progress made last week demonstrates that a constructive spirit amongst negotiators exists, and here in Glasgow, we have a unique opportunity to reach a historic outcome, and I'm committed to bringing countries together. We want to forge agreement that means we see more action this decade to help keep the limit of 1.5 degrees global temperature rise in reach. Now, during the informal stock-taking plenary, which was held this morning, I outlined how we will work during this week. I also announced ministerial pairings on key topics. These include adaptation, loss and damage, finance, keeping 1.5 alive, and of course the key rulebook issues of common timeframes, Article 6 on carbon markets, and transparency. My priority now is pace. There needs to be a sense of urgency in all our negotiations. The science is clear, we have no time to lose, and I will ensure that negotiations proceed in a timely manner, whilst, of course, ensuring transparency and inclusivity. Last week, countries made commitments which will all help to protect our planet, but they must be delivered on and accounted for. Today, on Adaptation and Loss and Damage Day, the spotlight will be on those nations and communities which are most vulnerable to climate change, those whose voices are too often left unheard. And we know that even if we stopped polluting our world tomorrow, there will be negative consequences for many millions. And that is why issues such as adaptation are so important. Now, I'm pleased to see progress on these topics today, and particularly welcome the commitments to the Adaptation Fund, which will be made in the next few hours, including from the UK, to support vulnerable communities to respond to climate change. Developed countries and development banks recognize they need to increase levels of finance for adaptation, and I hope we will be able to capture this renewed commitment in the COP26 negotiated outcome. Those of you who have followed this process will know that loss and damage has historically been seen as a polarizing issue. But I'm encouraged that the mood music has changed somewhat, and there is now a practical recognition that action is needed on this topic in the face of growing impacts. The conclusion of discussions within the subsidiary bodies on the Santiago network is a testament to that and paves the way for greater resources to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. Climate vulnerable communities are particularly at the forefront of my mind and will be so throughout these negotiations. They, and the generations to come, will not forgive us if we fail to deliver in Glasgow. I'd now like to pass to the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Patricia Espinosa for her remarks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for being here, joining this presidency's press conference. I want to just maybe building on the very comprehensive summary that the President has just presented, underline that the arrangements that he has put in place for this week and the involvement of ministers, in my view, are a very, very positive development. They have, many of them have already arrived. I would say most of them have already arrived, and they are all eager and willing to get involved in the negotiations. And actually, the decisions that need to be taken now are more of political level decisions. So that is really a very, very welcomed development, and the way that the President has arranged the organization of work for week 2, I think should allow us to be successful, to be able to adopt a meaningful group of decisions at the end of this week. I am cautiously optimistic, I would say, about it. Yes, because the issues under discussion are not easy, but what I can see now is that the will and the political level participation is there. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Yes, the acronym is always a challenge. UNFCCC stands for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. For the reporting, it may be easier to use UN climate change. Thank you. Is there any statement to come, or shall we proceed for Q&As?
I think we're happy to take questions.
Okay, please. Let's start in the first row.
Hi, Leslie Hook from the Financial Times. A question for Alec. What would you like to see in the cover text? What's the sort of ideal contents of that document? Thank you.
So, Leslie, thank you for that. We have put out a non-paper, as you are aware, detailing the issues that have been raised by parties over the last week. Obviously, we're going to have a discussion around that. Archie Young, my chief negotiator, has been leading on that work, and there will be a heads of delegation meeting later on this afternoon to discuss those issues. So maybe, Archie, if you wanted to comment.
Thank you very much. As the COP President says, we've been engaging widely with parties and with groups, both bilaterally, and also we have held multilateral consultations in order to hear from all what their expectations are, what they would like to see. As a result, we put out the non-paper over the weekend. We have already heard some feedback, and we continue to welcome that. We will be having a meeting this afternoon with all heads of delegation in order to continue to hear the feedback, and on the basis of that, we will then set out next steps. 2 points I would raise on it. One is that we have been clear through the various reflections notes from the COP President, from the ministerial meetings that we have held, our expectations that this conference will deliver in terms of the science and in terms of the expectations of all of our citizens. And the second is to highlight the inclusive approach that we're taking by really co-creating this with all parties and with groups, so that this is not simply a text which is kind of arrives from the presidency, but one which is really developed constructively and collaboratively with all parties and groups. Thank you.
We continue in the first row, please.
Thank you. My name is Justin Catanoso. I'm with Manga Bay. This issue is to transparency and accountability. In the United Kingdom and the European Union, the biggest source of renewable energy is burning forest biomass instead of coal. So I'll set aside for a moment the question of whether this is driving deforestation in places like the United States and Canada, which are producing these wood pellets. My question is, are you concerned that the emissions from millions of tons of burning wood are not counted at the smokestack in the European Union, in the UK, and that this is, in effect, affecting the accuracy of the carbon accounting in those countries and the transparency as well? And this comes in light of today's investigative story in the Washington Post about many, many countries underreporting their emissions and a lack of transparency and accuracy. This gets to the heart of what you're trying to accomplish here. Thank you.
Well, I mean, obviously, as I've said, one of the things that we are very keen to close off are all the outstanding elements of the rulebook, and transparency is a key outstanding element, and that is something that we have been discussing for some years now. Transparency absolutely underpins the Paris Agreement, and obviously we need to be able to see that the commitments that are being made are actually being delivered on. And there's an enormous amount of work that has been done so far by our officials and negotiators on this issue. But of course, what we need to see is that we close off transparency at this COP. Do you want to say that? Would you like to come in? No. Sorry, the use of biomass. Well, look, I mean, I think what we're going to, as I said, I think the key issue here is to ensure that we get agreement on the transparency tables that are going to form the basis of what is reported. There are a range of emissions that will be part of those transparency tables, and as I said, what we want to do is to reach consensus on that.
The gentleman in row 3. Sorry, 4.
Hello, Felix von Geyer with neworator.com. Now, I think anyone who's been on the COPs before would realize that, as you were saying, they've been very politically polarized, for example, in Madrid. While some of the politics haven't quite gone away, I think many of the issues are probably now more technical in things like corresponding adjustments, carryovers, and loss and damage. Is there anything you would like to say about these technical issues, particularly on, say, corresponding adjustments and loss and damage, which would be instructive to journalists understanding where we are with current negotiations? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I think as you'll have heard from the SB chairs this morning, there are a range of issues that were closed off by them, and I really welcome the work that they and their teams have put in. Clearly, some of those elements that are coming forward are technical, but there are also elements which are political as well. And I think closing off on Article 6 on transparency and common timeframes will require a political consensus to be built amongst ministers, and it's why I outlined for you the 7 areas as well, and in the plenary I set out which pairings of ministers will lead work on this. I'll invite Archie Young if he wants to say anything from a technical perspective on what's gone on in the last week.
Thank you very much, and you're right to highlight the fact that this COP has a lot of technical detail. Previous COPs have as well. That technical detail has always underpinned our work. And actually, I think what you've seen at this COP is, from the start, a very strong political direction, which was intended to really enable some of that technical work to be resolved. You mentioned corresponding adjustments. For those who aren't familiar, that's one of the the main issues outstanding with regard to Article 6, but the issue of how you make sure that there is consistent and clear accounting on the new 6.4 mechanism. And that is a technical issue, but actually it is political in terms of both the strong interests, the national interests that are driving different positions, and also political in terms of the way that it can uphold environmental integrity in Article 6 and the Paris Agreement as a whole. On loss and damage, as the COP president said, we're pleased at the progress that was made on the technical work through the subsidiary bodies over the last week in clarifying the functions of the new Santiago network on loss and damage. But equally, we've heard clearly a political desire for more work on loss and damage, for more work on the functions, and also for more work on how we can scale up the finance that can avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. So I think on all of these, there is the technical work, but it is never far from the political considerations that are driving the work here. Thank you.
So, if I may just to add on this point, I hope it's useful. I think it's also important to take into account that here we're talking about issues that are interrelated, and that the climate change architecture has a balance between the different components. We have mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, means of implementation, including finance, technology, and capacity building. So that also plays a part in the way that the negotiations are addressed, and also explains why there needs to be these political level interventions. In the case of Article 6, for example, it is very directly linked to adaptation, especially adaptation finance. It is linked to transparency as well. And on the other hand, transparency is linked to different other parts of the package. So this is why the COP president has put together this group of ministers under his leadership is so important, because it's really the best way to put together the whole package and find that very delicate balance.
Thank you. The lady in green, row 3. 3. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Katie Collins with CNET. I'm here today with 2 questions. Firstly, Global Witness released a report this morning saying that there were more than 500 fossil fuel lobbyists here at COP, more than in any national delegation. How and why has this been allowed to happen? What role are they playing here, and how can this be justified given their complicity in propagating climate change denial narratives and the harm they have done and continue to do that has brought us here in the first place? Secondly, former US President Barack Obama is currently speaking here at COP today with a message to the youth. But the youth here at COP, including Black, Indigenous, and people of colour, have not been able to get tickets. In fact, they complained of being shut out of many key events this week, even though outside they are showing themselves to be leaders in this fight. Mr. Obama's message will not be heard by them today. Why has more space not been made for them?
Thank you. Let me take those first, and I think Patricia may want to come in as well on a logistics issue. So, firstly, in terms of attendance by, I think you referred to folks related to oil and gas. I mean, at the end of the day, it is up to parties and observers who gets accredited as part of their delegation. And ultimately, accreditation is a matter for the UNFCCC, and Patricia might want to comment on that. Your second issue was about youth and access. Again, I think the UNFCCC may want to set out the statistics on the number of registered delegates here, particularly those from civil society and observer groups. There has certainly been an issue in terms of access to rooms, but that's been an issue for parties as well as observers, because of course, we are holding this in quite unprecedented times. There is a reason that we're restricting the numbers in rooms because of COVID safety. There's a reason why, of course, you're all wearing face coverings. We're having our daily testing regime. And I think we have tried, and we will continue to try, to ensure that the process is as inclusive as possible. There is, of course, also an online platform which is available, and as I understand, about 12,000 people have now made use of that as well. Patricia, I don't know whether you want to add anything on these two issues.
Well, regarding the first point about the fossil fuel lobbyist, well, first of all, I think that what I would like to say is we don't have any constituency that that is representatives of fossil fuel companies. I mean, this is not something we don't have a partnership. The UNFCCC doesn't have any partnership with fossil fuel companies. But in our process, some of the constituencies may accredit some people that are linked, may be linked to some of these fossil fuels. The same in the case of some party delegations. You know, it is really the sovereign right for every government to accredit as a representative, as part of its delegation, the persons that it deems appropriate. The Secretariat, there's no legal basis for us in the Secretariat to say, okay, we will exclude this or that person. Having said that, what I would like to say is also that we always say this is an inclusive process. And what is a fact is that the transformation, the process of transformation that we need to see requires also a transformation in this sector, and requires a just transition, a just energy transition everywhere around the world. So I think that these are the two elements that we take into account when we do engage in dialogue, of course, with those companies, in telling them, making the point very clearly, look, this is something that needs to change. It is not something that you will be able to go on forever. I mean, you know that some of our parties are oil-producing countries. Some of them have also even state-owned oil companies. We need all of that industry also to change. We need them on board. But we do not allow an open lobbying or open promotion of oil and gas, of course. That would be against the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the Convention.
Sorry, Patricia, just in terms of the number of registered civil society youth delegate issue? I would need to, do you have the number of the youth?
Well, not of the youth. We have, I can give you the number of the observers. It's 14,124 registered participants. Then maybe to put it into perspective, 22,274 party delegates and 3,886 media.
So if I may on that also, it is really a very big number, and we have made also for the observers an effort to allow more people to participate. So you see those high numbers. It doesn't mean that they are here at the same time all the time. Some of them are registered to participate on some dates, not the whole 2 weeks. that was something that took us a long time to figure out, so that we could even issue daily badges, so that, you know, instead of only being, I don't know, 5 people throughout 2 weeks, they could bring in maybe 20 people, and that would make it also for the constituency inside more inclusive. So yes, these are very, very high numbers, and our objective has been that we remain as inclusive as possible. And in accessing the rooms, the limitations that they are experiencing are exactly the same limitations that parties are experiencing. It's the same. It's just the physical space that is available, and what we are doing is ensuring that there is space for the constituencies to be in the room, to be represented. The President heard them this morning also in the informal plenary. All of the constituencies had an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. We try again. The lady, row 3 in green.
Hello, thank you. I'm Larissa from DPA, German Press Agency, and my question is for President Sharma. I would like to come back to the non-paper that you mentioned earlier, and I would like to know why the priorities of the British presidency, such as phasing out coal or the focus on cars and trees, have not been mentioned in this paper, and if you intend to change that on a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just in response to the earlier question, of course, both the Executive Secretary and I have been to a number of youth events, younger events, COI events over the last week as well. Your issue in terms of the non-paper, well, what the non-paper, of course, reflects is what we've heard from different parties over the past week. And it is on the basis of that that paper has been produced. Obviously, there will be a further discussion that takes place later on this afternoon on the detail of that, and we will see how that actually evolves. But I think and if Archie wants to comment, he's very welcome to, but as we've said, the aim of this is to build consensus. It's not for the UK presidency to sort of set something out there. We want to build this from the bottom up.
We have time for one more question. The lady in the second row.
Megan Rowling from Thomson Reuters. Going into the conference, we knew how big the ambition gaps are on emissions and on climate finance and on adaptation. And since the non-paper came out, there's been quite a lot of criticism of the possible elements in there, saying that there isn't enough ambition reflected on things like adaptation finance. It's just repeating what's in the Paris Agreement, which hasn't really got us very far, or definitely not far enough. And my question is for Patricia. Patricia, do you see that this non-paper has enough ambition or potential for ambition to be increased in it? And would you hope that there would be much more work done this week in order to build that up from the bottom, as the presidency just mentioned? And is there actually the possibility to do that? Thank you.
Well, my first comment would be that I believe that this non-paper actually does not yet reflect actual text. It reflects bullet points of issues that need to be addressed. So I think there we are still at the early stages. Yes, I definitely hope that we will have more ambition than what we have had before. You are right in saying we still have the finance gap. At the same time, I think we can see, we are aware that there are still efforts being done to see how much more finance can flow. Today, during the Adaptation Day, we are seeing already some additional announcements. Now, the fact is that we are coming to the COP with really the clear picture that we're not there. And at the same time, the assessment by the science that we can make it. We still can make it, but we need a decision. So we need to accelerate the process going forward. So I'm hoping that what we will be seeing coming out of here is, of course, a strong reaffirmation of the commitment, but then also indications on how we are going to be addressing those gaps and how we are going to, what are going to be our tools to accelerate the transition to a low carbon world.
So if I may, sir, I'd like Archie to just come in on the non-paper issue, given that we're about to have a discussion with heads of delegates.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to come in to, and I know you already know this, but point out the difference between, of course, the cover decision, which is very much the political signal, the operative decisions, which sit beneath that, which is where very clear decisions are taken through the process. And you will see in the bullets that we have set out in the non-paper that there are square brackets around placeholders, particularly on adaptation and on finance, which recognizes the fact that there is ongoing work, both technical work and also now, at the request of the President, ministerial work on those issues in order to drive forward further action. In addition, given that today is Adaptation and Loss and Damage Day, as has been mentioned, I think what we hope to see is some very strong announcements and commitments as well, which can demonstrate progress on those issues. On the ministerial tracks on adaptation and on finance, we certainly hope that that work can help to provide the political momentum to the technical work, and then through both the operative decisions and the cover decisions and the summary of the various commitments that have been made, our hope is that that will help to drive forward action on those critical issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have to leave now because next event is already ongoing, the Adaptation Fund meeting, so both have to be there. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.